let me ask you something. How much of your tomato plant is actually feeding you? You give it a big patch of ground, you give it a whole summer, and you get, what, a couple dozen tomatoes off a sprawling mess that took over the yard. On the island of Kume, off the west coast of Okinawa, there is a man named Hideo Nakamura, 104 years old, and he pulls something close to 200 tomatoes out of a patch the size of a bathroom rug, 10 square feet, same plant you grow. So how? It comes down to one decision he makes that you have probably never even considered. He grows up, not out. He trains every tomato plant onto a single vertical string and ruthlessly removes everything that does not make fruit. That is the whole game. Let me show you exactly how he does it, step by step, because you can set this up this Saturday morning. First, honesty. Hideo Nakamura is a composite, a stand-in for the real elder gardeners of the Okinawan Islands, whose methods are well documented. The man is a story, the method is real. And I am a gardener telling you what works, not a doctor and not an agronomist. Your yard, your call. Here is the problem with how we grow tomatoes. We let them sprawl. A tomato is a vine that wants to run in every direction, and if you let it, it does. It throws out side shoots, then those throw side shoots, and pretty soon you have a 6-foot bush. Looks impressive, but that bush is spending almost all its energy growing more plant, not more fruit. The inside gets dark and crowded, air does not move, disease moves in, and the fruit that does set is hidden, shaded, and small. You gave it 10 square feet, and it gave you back a jungle with a handful of tomatoes buried in it. Hideo does the opposite. He picks one kind of tomato, an indeterminate type, the kind that keeps growing taller all season instead of stopping at one flush. That choice matters, so write it down. Indeterminate. A determinate tomato grows to a set size, dumps all its fruit in 2 weeks, and quits. That is fine for canning. It is wrong for this. Hideo wants a plant that climbs and produces for months, so he grows the tall, vining kind. Then he gives each plant a single string, a strong cord, anchored in the soil at the base, running straight up to a wire or a beam 8 feet over his head. As the plant grows, he gently winds the main stem around that string, one stem, straight up, that is it. The plant becomes a single green column reaching for the sky. Now, the part that makes people nervous. He prunes hard. Every week, Hideo goes down each plant and finds the little shoots that sprout in the joint between the main stem and a leaf. Those are called suckers. Most gardeners leave them. Hideo pinches every single one off while they are small. Why? Because each sucker, left alone, becomes a whole second plant competing for the same food and water. Pinch it off, and all that energy goes where you want it, into fruit, into the next flower cluster up the stem. It feels brutal the first time. You are removing growth, but you are trading useless leaf for tomatoes, and that trade is the entire secret. So picture it, one stem, climbing a string, stripped of suckers. Every few inches up that stem, a cluster of flowers, then a cluster of fruit. The plant is not wasting a single calorie on sideways growth. It is a fruit-making machine pointed straight up. And because it is vertical and open, the sun hits every leaf, the air moves through, and disease cannot get a foothold. Hideo can stand 4 of these columns in 10 square feet, because each one needs almost no horizontal room. 4 plants, each climbing 8 feet, each loaded with cluster after cluster after cluster. Do the math, and 200 tomatoes off 10 square feet stops sounding crazy, but the string is only half of it. The other half is underneath, in the soil, because a plant working that hard needs to be fed like it. Hideo does not grow these in tired dirt. Before he plants, he digs deep and fills that narrow strip with the richest stuff he has. His own compost, fish scraps, banana stalk, wood ash, all buried a few weeks ahead, so it is breaking down by the time the roots arrive. A vertical tomato has a small footprint but a deep, hungry root run, and he gives it a column of rich living soil to drive down into. Up top it is reaching for sun, down below it is mining a vein of buried food. He feeds for fruit, not for leaf. This is where most people wreck their tomatoes. They pour on nitrogen, the stuff in most tomato fertilizer, and nitrogen makes leaves. Big green leaves and no fruit. Hideo barely uses nitrogen at all. When the first flowers open, he feeds potassium and calcium. The potassium comes from wood ash and banana leaf steeped in rainwater. The calcium comes from ground eggshell and crushed coral shell worked into the planting hole. Potassium builds the fruit. Calcium keeps the bottom of the fruit from rotting into that black sunken patch. Feed those two when the fruit sets, hold the nitrogen, and the plant pours everything into tomatoes. Water is deep and steady, not a splash every evening. A long soak straight to the soil. In the morning, twice a week, deep enough to reach those driven down roots. The bed is mulched thick so the water stays put, and the Sunbelt sun cannot bake it out. A tomato that swings between bone dry and soaking wet splits its fruit and drops its blossoms. Steady moisture, deep down, is what keeps 200 fruit setting and swelling without cracking. Now your climate, because this matters more in the Sunbelt than almost anywhere, a tomato flower stops setting fruit once the day climbs past the low 90s. Your Texas and Florida and Arizona afternoons blow right past that for weeks. So Hideo's vertical columns are never standing in full blazing western sun all day. In Okinawa, there is always a taller plant or a wall throwing afternoon shade. You copy that with a strip of light shade cloth on the west side of your tomato wall. Morning sun, full and strong. Afternoon, a little mercy. That alone keeps your plants setting fruit through the part of summer that shuts everyone else down. Without it, your 200 tomatoes becomes 20 and a lot of dropped flowers. Let me give you the whole thing in order, so you can build it. Pick an indeterminate, tall vining tomato, dig your strip deep, and bury rich compost and shell calcium a few weeks before you plant. Set your seedlings deep, right up to the top leaves, spaced close, maybe 1.5 feet apart in a single line. Run a strong string from the base of each one, straight up to a wire 8 feet overhead. As they grow, wind the main stem around the string and pinch off every sucker every week, no mercy. Mulch the ground thick, put shade cloth on the west side before the worst heat. Water deep twice a week in the morning. And when the flowers open, feed potassium and calcium, never nitrogen. Then you just keep winding and pinching and picking all season long off a patch the size of a rug. Here's the thing about picking too. On a vertical plant, you can see everything. Every ripe tomato is right there at eye level, hanging clean and open, not buried in a bush or rotting on wet ground. Hideo walks his 4 columns every morning and takes what is ready. The plant responds to picking by setting more. The more you harvest, the more it makes. A sprawling bush hides half its fruit until it is overripe or chewed. A vertical column hands you every tomato, clean, in order, top to bottom. Let me deal with the worry I can hear you having, because everyone has it the first time. If I strip off all those suckers, am I not removing the leaves the plant needs? It is a fair question, and the answer is no, and here is why. A tomato does not need a giant bush of leaves to make fruit. It needs enough healthy leaves to feed the fruit it is carrying, and no more. The suckers you pinch are not feeding your tomatoes. They are starting whole new branches that will demand their own water and food and make their own small shaded late fruit. By removing them, you are not starving the plant. You are focusing it. The leaves that remain on that single climbing stem are all in full sun, all working at full power, all pointed at feeding the fruit clusters right above them. A pruned single-stem tomato has fewer leaves, but every one of them earns its keep. A sprawling bush has hundreds of leaves, and half of them sit in the shade doing nothing but using up water. The clusters are the part that adds up to 200. So let me show you how that math actually works, because it sounds impossible until you count it. An indeterminate tomato sets a flower cluster every few inches as it climbs. Each cluster can hold anywhere from 4 to a dozen fruit, depending on the type. Over a full season, a single stem trained 8 feet up the string will form 15, 20, even more clusters, one after another, all the way to the top. Multiply a couple dozen clusters by a handful of tomatoes each, and one plant alone can give you 50, 60, 80 fruit. Stand 4 of those columns in your 10 square feet, and 200 is not a wild claim. It is just arithmetic. The sprawling bush forms the same clusters, but half of them abort or rot in the shade and the damp, so you never see them. The vertical plant brings every cluster into the light where it can actually finish. There is a rhythm to tending these, and it is gentle, which is part of why a man of 104 can run 4 columns without strain. Once a week, Hideo walks the line and does 3 small things. He winds the new growth another turn around each string. He pinches off the week's new suckers while they are still tiny and snap off with a fingernail. And he picks what has ripened. That is the entire job. No digging, no bending, no hauling. 15 minutes a week per plant, done standing up, eye to eye with the fruit. He told a neighbor that the work is so light, he sometimes feels he is not gardening at all, just keeping a tall friend company while it does the real work. Compare that to wrestling a sprawling bush, hunting for hidden tomatoes on your knees in the wet, fighting the disease that crowding invites. The vertical way is less work and more food. That combination is rare enough that when you find it, you hold on to it. One more practical thing, because it trips people up. That string has to be strong, and so does what it hangs from. A stem loaded with 80 tomatoes is heavy, real weight, and a flimsy stake or a weak line will fail in August right when the fruit is at its peak. Hideo runs a stout horizontal wire or a sturdy beam well overhead, anchored at both ends, and ties each plant string to that. Build the support before you plant. Build it stronger than you think you need, and you will never have the heartbreak of a loaded plant collapsing in a summer storm. When I first saw this method laid out, my honest reaction was that I had been doing tomatoes exactly backwards my whole life. I gave them space and let them sprawl, thinking more plant meant more fruit. It is the opposite. Less plant, pointed up, fed deep, gives more fruit. Hideo's not working harder than you. His patch is tiny. His tools are a string and his own fingers. He is just refusing to let the plant waste itself on growth that does not feed him. Every pinch of a sucker is a vote for tomatoes over leaves. Multiply that across a whole season and 4 plants, and you get a wall of fruit out of 10 square feet. There is something else worth saying. Because the footprint is so small, anyone can do this. You do not need a big yard, a narrow strip along a fence, a few feet against the sunny side of the house, a single raised bed. If you can stand 4 strings up 8 feet, you can grow this. Hideo is 104, and he does the whole thing without bending much because everything is at standing height, climbing up to him instead of sprawling down at his feet. For older gardeners, for anyone with a bad back or bad knees, that vertical eye-level garden is not just more productive. It is far easier on the body. You tend it standing up. He told a younger neighbor once that a tomato plant will give you exactly what you ask it for. Ask it to grow big, and it grows big. Ask it to make fruit, and it makes fruit. The pruning, the stringing, the pinching, all of it is just how you ask. Most of us never ask. We just turn it loose and hope. Hideo asks clearly every week with his fingers, and the plant answers with 200 tomatoes off a bathroom rug. Let me say something about the soil under all this one more time, because the string and the pruning get all the attention and they are only half the engine. A plant making 80 tomatoes is doing an enormous amount of work, and it cannot do that work standing in 4 inches of tired dirt. Hideo's secret weapon is not really the string. It is the deep, rich, living strip of soil he buries under the row weeks before he plants. Rotten fish, banana stalk, his own compost, wood ash, all breaking down into a dark vein of food that the roots drive straight down into. The vertical plant has a tiny footprint up top, but a deep taproot reaching into that buried larder. If you do the string and skip the soil, you will get a tall plant with disappointing fruit. Do both, and you get the wall of tomatoes. Feed the ground first, then point the plant at the sky. That order matters. And keep picking. This is the part people forget at the end of the season. A tomato plant is not trying to feed you. It is trying to make seed and reproduce, and once it has a few ripe fruit hanging on it, it eases off, satisfied. So you have to keep taking the ripe ones off constantly to keep it anxious and producing. Every tomato you pick is a signal to the plant to set more. Hideo harvests every single morning, never letting fruit sit and overripen on the vine, and that steady picking is part of why the clusters keep coming all the way up the string. A bush you harvest once a week slows down. A column you pick every day keeps racing for the top. So here is your one move for this Saturday. You do not have to rebuild your whole garden. Take one tomato plant, the tall vining kind. Stand a string up over it. Wind the stem up and start pinching the suckers. Feed it potassium when it flowers. Shade it in the afternoon. Water it deep. Just one plant, done this way, and watch what it does next to the sprawling ones you grew the old way. That side by side will teach you more than I can in 10 minutes. Then next year you build the wall. If you want the full Okinawan backyard system, the spacing, the feeding schedule, the plant sourcing for your zone, it is all laid out in the handbook linked down in the description. And tell me in the comments, how big is the patch you grow tomatoes in right now, and how many do you actually get off it in a season? I want to see the before. Come back next year with the after. Last honest word. This is gardening, not a guarantee. Your variety, your soil, your sun, and your steady hand on the pruning all decide the number. So start with one string and one plant. Wind it up, pinch it clean, feed it for fruit. That single column, done right, is where the 200 tomatoes begin.